So, what are the best, most underrated supplements? I get asked this quite a lot, and We did episodes before about my favorite hormones, my favorite peptides, my favorite nutrients, but we've never done supplements like everything other than essential nutrients. So I thought that's what we could do in this episode, and I guess for people watching or listening along, if you already have strong experience with a certain supplement item on our list, and feel free to skip that one and go to the next one. But I guess the point of this is to let you know that there's some really cool stuff out there. I'm very fortunate and privileged because of my role. I've tested like, I don't know, probably over 1,000 different supplements. Let's say because my role, the business expenses, because one of the things I do is formulate products for myself and other people. And so I've tried a lot of different ingredients. I've got a lot of feedback from people. Obviously, as a result of that, also I'm studying research papers and seeing what works. I'm looking at reviews. I'm looking at all kinds of things. So I feel I have a better idea than most about what supplements actually work. But I will just give in this episode my own personal preference. So I'm not talking in this theoretical sense. I'm talking about what I like, what works for me, what I on a routine basis recommend to other people, whether it's friends, family, loved ones, or clients.
Ellen, I love that you're in that unique position because you are the person that I go to ask for advice, especially. And as well, one of the things too with certain supplements, which I know you definitely find, and Dr. Miriam has also found, is that the effectiveness. So that's great that you have the opportunity to really try, a variety, because it does make a difference. And those of you that are joining us again, welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and this is the most fantastic Elwin Robinson, who we are looking to today for his favorite supplements.
Thank you. And remember to like, comment if you're on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you are. So let's get into it.
Beautiful. So we've got a list, lovely listeners, today. So we're just going to work through the different ones. So let's just start it off with, one of the things that I'm looking at, and we've done a recent episode on too, is insulin resistance. So what are your favorites for that? What is your favorite for that?
Yeah. So to explain the format of the show, will be basically like goal or challenge oriented, and for every goal or challenge, I'll just say, here's my number one supplement. And the rules that I've imposed on myself is I will not give essential nutrients. So anything that your body makes itself, or anything that your body must have, I guess. I'm not going to say those just because we've really done quite a few episodes on those already, and we might do another one again. So in this category, for instance, the one you just asked, there's evidence that, an amino acid like L-carnitine is actually quite effective for insulin resistance. But I'm not going to say that. First of all, it's not the first thing that I recommend to people. And second of all, it's in that category of nutrients. So this is non-nutrient supplements, just to clarify that. This one, I think we can do this one quickly. It's because it's one that I've talked about a couple of times before, and it is berberine. Insulin resistance is hugely important. There are a few different ingredients that are effective for insulin resistance, but honestly, like my go-to, if I start seeing my insulin creeping up, in fact, I've started doing berberine recently because I just was dabbling with growth hormone releasing peptides again recently. And so I thought, if I'm making my growth hormone go up, then there's that slim chance that my insulin might go up. And so to prevent that from happening, to make sure it doesn't happen, I'm very confident that, berberine is satisfactory for that. So again, like there are a lot of things, and I am currently formulating as part of a new range, a weight loss range, an insulin resistance formula, and it will have a bunch of other ingredients in there. But if we're talking about just one supplement, non-nutrient supplement ingredient, definitely berberine. Berberine is highly effective. It does a bunch of other stuff as well. It does help to lower blood glucose as well for those who've gone beyond just insulin resistance and are now into kind of pre-diabetes or even diabetic where the insulin is high. So a quick reminder, berberine is, it's not a herb, it's a constituent of some herbs, golden seal, for instance, being one of the herbs. So it's like an alkaloid, I think, within a herb, within several different herbs. And it is very similar, the mechanism of action of it is very similar to the drug metformin. And so metformin is generally given to lower high blood glucose and to reduce reduce insulin resistance. So berberine, honestly, is not as powerful at the kind of recommended dose of each as metformin, the drug, but the side effect profile is significantly lower. And so most practitioners, let's say, I'm pretty sure I can say this on behalf of Dr. Miriam, if you are a medical doctor, but also functional medicine trained, so if you understand the validity of both options, I think generally you start with berberine always because it is much safer and still highly effective. If it's not highly effective enough because the person's pretty far gone down that road, then you might, still prescribe metformin as a practitioner, as a doctor who can prescribe things. But berberine's a great starting place. If it doesn't work, then next step might be like a full formula with a bunch of different things, including berberine, like what I'm formulating, or next step maybe something pharmaceutical. That's of course in terms of taking stuff. I know that there's all kinds of other things that you can do if you have insulin resistance, and I think the other day we just released a full episode on that. That'll be a few weeks ago by the time this comes out, so definitely check my guide on that as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as well, with a lot of these things, there are lifestyle and environmental things that you can take care of as well. But this is really looking at, okay, if we need some extra assistance, here's your number one recommendation. With this, I'm assuming, would there be any precautions or anything that somebody needs to look after?
Yeah, fairly mild. I'll just respond to the other thing you said there first. Yeah, so when I was putting this episode together, I was like, if I don't know anything effective enough to be worth mentioning for a specific goal or challenge, then we just won't do that goal or challenge. So everything that I mentioned, it's effective enough that I'm going to include it in the episode, and then maybe in part two. And yeah, by the way, in terms of a part two, I don't know how far we'll get today, but let us know if you enjoy this, and maybe we'll do a part two with more goals and number one supplements. And then also, I could perhaps do an episode where I talk about my least favorite supplements, the ones that are the biggest waste of money or have the highest side effect profile, which goes back to your question there. Um, so yeah, with berberine, the main thing that's listed is similar to metformin, which is digestive disturbance. The other thing that berberine is actually very effective for, I think underrated effective for, is SIBO. So small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and to some degree even large intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It knocks back quite a few of the bad bacteria, the pathogenic or dysbiotic bacteria, if they get excessive. There is no herb or antibiotic that is effective for every bad bacteria, which is why you have many types of antibiotics. People are always like, oh, if you take an antibiotic, it's going to immediately kill all your gut bacteria. And it's absolutely not true. I've seen people's stool sample immediately after doing like rounds of sometimes several different types of antibiotics, and they still have loads of bacteria. So this idea that immediately wipes out all bacteria isn't true. The argument is that often the good bacteria are actually more sensitive and wiped out more easily, which I do think is credible, and that is really the problem. But anyway, so berberine knocks back some bacteria, but not all. And so, however, anecdotally, and I think not just in my case, it's often one of the first things reached for by functional medicine practitioners, people like that, for SIBO, because it's pretty safe, pretty low side effects profile, not too indiscriminate, like things like garlic and oregano oil and grapeseed extract are a lot more, in a way, powerful, but I'd say more annoyingly, just very, like, they kill a lot of stuff. Not everything again, but a lot of stuff. Where berberine is pretty good at targeting just certain strains of bad bacteria.
Yeah, kind of like net fishing versus line fishing in a way.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so for that reason, but because of everything I just said, because that's another use for it, and I could have put it in that category as like my favorite, SIBO treatment. It can create digestive disturbance, absolutely. Because if you're killing bad bacteria that doesn't want to be killed, it can absolutely, all the usual burping, bloating, belching, farting, all of that kind of stuff. It can create all of that and more. And so that's probably the number one thing. Metformin does that as well, by the way. So just because it's a drug doesn't mean it doesn't have that effect. There's kind of research to show that one of the other reasons people take berberine as well is for weight loss. I wouldn't put it as my weight loss thing directly, but indirectly, yes, through insulin resistance, because insulin resistance is one of the main reasons why people can't lose weight. So indirectly, I think it is absolutely very effective for weight loss if that's what your issue is. But honestly, with a lot of people, it's at least one of the things preventing them from losing weight is insulin resistance. You rarely see someone overweight who doesn't have some degree of insulin resistance. Now, there's plenty of people with insulin resistance who aren't overweight as well, especially as they get older. But yeah, when someone's very overweight, they are almost always have insulin resistance. So anyway, there's various reasons why you might take berberine, but yeah, the digestive discomfort is like the the usual thing that's talked about. Dr. Miriam also talks about like the Chinese medicine perspective, because she's very much raised in that as well, and that it has this energy of being like quite cold to the digestive tract, and it can have that effect after a while. I'm not sure. I just don't have practical experience of it, but I think there's something to it when Chinese medicine talks about these effects. I definitely think that it's likely that a certain type of person it's imbalancing for them, even though I don't understand the exact mechanism. So that's something probably to watch for as well. So what I mean by quite cold is not necessarily it's going to make you feel cold, but more that it will dampen the digestive fire over time, potentially. That's my understanding of what it is. And so, but that's a controversial take. I think if you're someone who is very healthy overall and exercises a lot and has a strong metabolism, I know some of those people do take metformin every day, or those people do take berberine every day and they're just fine with it. But there's definitely an argument to be made that if your digestive fire is already a bit sluggish and slow, and if you're already a bit low metabolism and all the rest of it, that taking a lot of berberine long term might be a bad idea. So that would be the other, caution that I'm aware of.
Okay, great. I mean, that's really good to know. Berberine, #1 supplement recommendation for insulin resistance, as well as the caveats there that you've listed. So things to watch out for. All right, perfect. Really good. Yeah, because insulin resistance is creeping up. It's more and more widespread. So it's one of the big things to look at. So everybody, if you would like to, we've done a few episodes. I'll put it in the links below so you can check out that episode in greater detail from Elwyn about how to resolve insulin resistance.
And I'll just say the vast majority of what we're going to be talking about today, I don't sell, but you happen to have picked one there that I do. So go to feelyoga.net. We do have berberine available. I think there's only 2 other products maybe that we might get to in this episode that are Feel Younger. So please don't think this is all product placement, but that is one of them. Please don't ask me where to get stuff from if it's not from my own website. Like I'm saying this to the viewers, the listeners, because it's not because I want to be mean. It's just like, even if I like that product today, by the time you like from a particular company today, I don't have any control over what's in that. And by the time you watch the video, maybe I don't like that brand anymore or whatever. So I just don't want to make recommendations without, being the one responsible for what's in it. In the case of Feel Younger, I'm responsible for what's in it. I know it's good. I know it will continue to be good. For anyone else, it's kind of, you're taking your own risk there, unfortunately, like I do on an ongoing basis. I try loads of other companies. Generally, everything's fine, but I'm just saying I can't, make an endorsement.
Good point. Good point. As we move through the list, next I've got neuropathy on our list. So what is your #1 recommendation for neuropathy?
Yeah, great question. So I was asked to formulate a product for this for someone else a couple of years ago. And it's someone who wanted a product line like with marketing funnel and all that, but also their was it great grandfather was like suffering with quite advanced neuropathy and advanced type 2 diabetes, and so it was like a perfect person to try the formula. Like they wanted to be sure it worked. It's like, well, there we go. If it works on this person, then it definitely works, kind of thing. Because they were quite far gone. And they actually did die like a year later or something like that. They were very sick and very old, and but they were in pain, right? So neuropathy. What does neuropathy mean? Just for those who aren't familiar, well, neuro means nervous system, and pathy means disease. So all it really means is disease of the nervous system. But normally when we talk about neuropathy, we're talking about like numbness, tingling, and pain, often like a burning pain. Tends to affect the extremities more, like the feet and the hands, but it can be throughout the body. And there's all kinds of things that can cause it, but usually it's like a side effect of type 2 diabetes. That's the most common, but it can be a bunch of other stuff. And I had it for a while. I had it as a result of heavy metal poisoning.
I was going to say, how did it present for you? Like, was it just suddenly came on, or was it more of a slow burn?
it was numbness and tingling without pain, luckily. But at the time, I was full of adrenaline and anxiety, so it still really freaked me out. Um, and does it come on suddenly? I think it was like, it's like often these things are like below awareness and like you don't really notice it. And then suddenly I'm like, why the hell is this happening? And I just started freaking out about it. I think that was it. It's hard to remember. It was quite a few years ago now. But so I looked into this, and yeah, lots of things can cause it, but you know, diabetes is the most common thing. Um, and there's quite a few things that can cause this: autoimmunity and toxicity and nutritional deficiency and stuff like that. And what I discovered is that nutritional deficiency is a big part of it. Vitamin B1 deficiency specifically, or thiamine, is the biggest of those nutrients. Now, I said I wasn't going to new nutrients, and I won't, but there is a modified form of that. It's technically nutrients, but it's so modified that in a lot of countries it's actually sold as a drug, but in America it's sold as a supplement, so I'm going to class it as a supplement. And it's called benfotiamine. And so benfotiamine is a fat-soluble version of thiamine, and it is very safe, very well tolerated, and very, very effective if someone has neuropathy. When I had that issue, even though mine wasn't really caused by a B1 deficiency, because I tested B1 and I was fine on that, it was caused by the amount of lead pouring from my blood, I discovered later. It was still effective. Like, it just seems to be highly effective. It's highly effective in the case of when it's created by type 2 diabetes, and there are things about B1 thiamine as well that help diabetes, like glucose metabolism and all kinds of stuff. But it's highly effective as well in the case of in every case. And I'm not quite 100% sure why it is, but my understanding is because it is just so healing for the nervous system.
So, is there any concerns with if somebody was to start taking benfotiamine?
I mean, you never know with anything. There's nothing in the universe that's 100% safe. But benfotiamine is one of those things that I have not come across anything. I've never come across a person having an issue with it. It actually seems to have less side effects than just straight B1 for whatever reason. B1, like, it's quite sulfurous. Some people have an issue with that. Yeah, so B1 is water soluble. Benfotiamine, the main difference about it is that it's fat soluble as well. So you'd think there might be a problem with it building up and all that kind of stuff, but I have not been able to find anything about how it's toxic at any level. I talked to Dr. Mayer about this because like, one person was just saying, "Oh, you need to cycle off it sometimes." And I was like, I'd stopped taking it by that time for quite a while, but like I took it for ages, and I never had any issues with it. And she said, "Yeah, no, I get people to take it for years. I've never had anyone have any issues with it." So, I mean, anecdotally, it's fine. Study-wise, I've never seen any actual studies that say that there's any issues with it. If anyone wants to point any to me, then feel free to add it on the comments in YouTube or Rumble, I guess. But I think it's pretty much just, I'd be more confident recommending benfotiamine to someone than, say, zinc or iron or anything like that. Like, it's very safe compared to most nutrients even.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And then as far as dosing, is there anything, specific with benfotiamine as far as dosage?
Usually using like several hundred milligrams, and if you want it to be really effective for neuropathy, it's probably not going to work at 5 milligrams or something. You're talking about like 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, 500 milligrams, even 1,000 milligrams quite easily. The studies are often using like 1,000 milligrams or more. So that's the kind of dose, and then it can be effective pretty quickly depending on how damaged the nerves are, obviously, how ill the nerves are. But I would say, do pretty high doses until it's effective, and then you could taper down at the level that, and if it comes back again, then kind of increase it again. The thing about B1 is, I think the reason why there isn't much of a toxicity issue with it is because your body just burns through it. And so even if it's this fat soluble version, if you're at that stage that you have neuropathy, your body is probably just burning through B1. And so having a toxic buildup of it seems like in practice it is very rare.
Okay, well, yeah, that's good to know. I mean, with this one, with benfotiamine, you did say is it both, did you say, water soluble and fat soluble? So would we have to worry about it building up in the system?
Like I just said, potentially, but like I
Potentially,
just
yeah.
said, not in practice, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, beautiful. All right, moving on to our next one. Let's take a look at dopamine. What's your number one supplement for dopamine?
Yeah, I've changed this one actually slightly. I think I mentioned something before. So to me, this is a supplement because I just buy it online. I think some people class it as a drug, but it's not something you require a prescription for, and I don't think it's something you can even get a prescription for. So I'm going to class it as a supplement, um, and that is adamantane. And so we talked before about bromantane. I think you might remember that, Chrissy. And so this is something developed by the Russians. Um, I'm very wary of dopamine boosting substances for two reasons. Number one, because anything that increases dopamine, it tends to be temporary and it tends to leave you lower in dopamine or lower in dopamine sensitivity afterwards. So, meaning, any stimulant, amphetamine, cocaine, caffeine, whatever it might be, will raise dopamine, but then it will, after the effect has run out, your dopamine will be lower and your body will have downregulated its production of dopamine a little bit. Your body will have reduced the sensitivity of dopamine receptors a little bit. And that's why you never feel as good on your second dose of any dopaminergic as you did on your first dose, as a general rule. And so the general rule of all these kind of drugs is they're highly addictive, and that when you first start taking them, it has a very strong effect. Some people it's too strong. People drink their first cup of coffee, or people take their first dose of amphetamine. They don't like it. They don't carry on doing it because it's so strong. But then after a while, you don't really get you don't get high, you don't get any benefit from taking it. You just take it because you feel bad if you don't take it. And that's often the case. And that's because the body downregulates the dopamine, and it downregulates the dopamine receptor sensitivity because it doesn't want too much dopamine. Too much dopamine is toxic and damaging. So when you try and artificially raise it, it will then just lower it.
Yeah, the body will kind of auto-correct there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's true for most things. There's a couple of exceptions, like we talked about, like oxytocin is one of those exceptions where that doesn't happen. But most of the things, like dopamine, like the opioids, for instance, and that's why, like GABA, and that's why those things are so addictive. The barbiturates, the opioids, the stimulants, they're addictive. And it's really hard to get off them because when you try and stop, your body's so depleted because it's downregulated your own production and sensitivity so much.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today.
The other problem with dopaminergics that is more particular to me and people like me, not necessarily everyone has this problem, but is that the body then quickly takes the dopamine and converts it into adrenaline and noradrenaline. And I think this is one of the reasons why with some people they don't feel good on stimulants of various kinds, or even if they do but they don't feel as good, is because of that tendency to make that conversion. And we've talked about that before. High levels of copper in the brain, for instance, will make that conversion happen quicker. So, because dopamine, despite it being kind of an adrenal neurotransmitter, it's actually relaxing and calming in its purest sense. Although it is also increases focus and motivation and stuff, it does it without stress. It's very interesting. And that's why it's kind of the best feeling in the world in a way. It's like euphoria, because it's like, it's not sedating, it's not turning anything off in you, it's turning everything on, but it's also not stressing you. So that's like a very great feeling that most people enjoy, pure dopamine. But unfortunately, it's in everyone to some degree, but in some people to a large degree, that gets converted quickly into adrenaline. And then that's the jittery and anxious and paranoid and all of those kind of side effects of stimulants that people don't necessarily like. So that's why I generally don't like almost anything that increases dopamine. And I'll put in that category even L-Dopa, which is found in the herb mucuna. The reason mucuna is not on my #1 supplement for dopamine is for the second reason, because for me, like I feel great for like 5 to 10 minutes, and then I just get anxious because it's just converted into adrenaline. It doesn't work. So what I really like about the Mantane family, I guess, and Bromantane is the more well-known version that I've talked about before, and that I think is a little bit well-known in the peptide world, the nootropic world, those kind of people. But I have found Adamantane actually to be more effective for longer. And so the mechanism of action is not like fully understood, but it seems one of the things that make it different from a stimulant. So with any dopaminergic, usually it's you take it, and then for a period of time you feel better. For cocaine, it may be a very short period of time. For like amphetamines, it may be several days, but whatever. For a period of time, you feel better. Then eventually it wears off. Dopamine goes down. You feel worse, and usually worse than before. So that's a typical thing with dopamine, with anything that boosts dopamine. Adamantane actually doesn't do that at all. It seems to work more by actually blocking the conversion of dopamine into something else and blocking the reuptake of dopamine. And so it kind of raises dopamine in a much more gradual way, in a much more sustainable way. So when you take it, you probably won't notice anything on the day unless you're very sensitive, which I know some of our viewers are. But it's more like a few days later, a week later, 2 weeks later, you're like, I'm able to focus more now. Oh, I'm just more relaxed now. Oh, I'm more present. Or, it's much more subtle, but it's also much more sustainable. You're not getting that spike in that crash. So for that reason, that family is my favorite for dopamine, for people who really struggle with low dopamine. And you might say, oh, Elwyn, why are you messing with these things, drugs? But almost everyone is on drugs, already. In my opinion, much more damaging, much more dangerous, much more addictive drugs than Bromantane and Adamantane. So sure, if you genuinely leave a 100% pure lifestyle and you don't want to mess with these kind of things, I completely respect that. But almost everyone is using stimulants, whether it's caffeine or nicotine or harder stuff. So to me, compared to those things, I actually find these to have a lower side effect profile to actually be more effective. And so therefore, if someone has low dopamine, it's my #1 supplement recommendation.
Yeah, that's good. And you mentioned some of the things to look out for as you were speaking, especially if that where the body tends to autocorrect. But it sounds like this Adamantane, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, it doesn't do that. It doesn't give the body space to down regulate it. It sounds like it's got its own mechanism of action where it kind of slowly helps over a period of time allow you to build it up.
Yeah, and it is actually it's the opposite, right? So most dopaminergics work by causing the release of dopamine into the system, and then some of them also work by increasing sensitization of dopamine receptors, but that's more unusual. But it's always this temporary effect, and so Adamantane, yeah, like all of those categories in the opposite. Now, for your next question, it absolutely still has a risk of side effects because you absolutely can have too much dopamine in your system. And so, so nausea, loss of appetite, dry mouth, all of that kind of stuff, that can be classic too much dopamine symptoms that you might experience while on any supplement. While on any stimulant. So put it this way, any negative side effect that you might have as a result of taking too much of a stimulant, you can have with adamantane because too much dopamine is too much dopamine. So that is a concern. So I would not recommend this just willy-nilly. There's not just to everyone to feel good. This is a good idea. But to me, it's more at a moderate to low dose. I always use less than recommended.
And what would that dose be?
Yeah, I mean, on the bottle, I don't think, this is pretty obscure what recommendations go.
Just a
But
guideline,
but I know, yeah, but I know on the bottle I have it, it gives a 33 milligram per serving, kind of not recommendation, but just guidance. I'm usually using and would maybe recommend like 5 to 10 milligrams. So I'm going well under that kind of amount. Obviously, the objection some people could make about that is that it doesn't work when it's such a low dose, and that's fine. Then you can increase it at your own risk. But I'm, keeping it very low. I still find that's effective enough for me to just counteract that tendency, as I say, for my dopamine to switch into adrenaline a little bit too much. So I like it for focus. I tend to take it on weekdays if I'm remember to have it at all. It's certainly kind of off and on depending on how I feel. I don't have it on weekends. So even if I generally feel like I need it, I don't have it on the weekend. Like I just have it when I feel like, I need to focus because of my work. Yeah, I go for a lower amount of anything like this because it is risky. It's a research chemical. There's not a huge amount of history of use, but it's just everything that does exist. And there is, I'm just scrolling now. There's like about 15 studies in front of me that look at what it does. It just seems to be pretty safe, and I'm willing to risk and try this kind of stuff. So again, I'm not saying you should have it, but I'm saying this is my favorites. This is my favorite thing for dopamine.
Great. Okay. Beautiful. So yes, if you are somebody that struggles with low dopamine, that's one to look out for. And yeah, brilliant. Oh, and that's really, really great. A really great suggestion. Next, I want to move into, because we talk about this a fair amount, is our body's ability to detoxify. So what is your number one supplement for detoxing or detoxification?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think we have another one later for liver, and we have another one later for gut health. So I want to give this one as distinct from all of that. And we have another one later for constipation. All of those things will support detoxification very significantly. So, but just distinct from all of that. And I think we did a list of my favorite binder because I think I've talked about that before. I didn't think of including that. But so separate from all of that, I actually really like EGCG. So I only discovered this as a result of Jacob's work, who we've had on the show twice now, and his Holy Grail formula for. He thinks it's mainly for copper and iron detoxification. That's really what he focuses on. He may be right. But the research kind of indicates it's actually pretty good at detoxifying a bunch of different things, including lead and cadmium, and I believe mercury. And so I have been impressed, both in terms of how I feel and then also looking at the actual test results of specifically looking at how much lead my urine contains, and it's way, way higher than usual after doing more EGCG.
Right.
And so
I know it's one of those things that you've had an issue with for quite some time and not really found something that can help you detoxify the lead out of your system so much. So it's great that you're making some headway with the EGCG.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's not much that's very effective with lead, honestly. It's just time. Keep sweating, keep your metabolism high, keep your calcium intake high. There's a lot to it, but basically, as you just said, a lot of it is just waiting. And there are things that are effective. EDTA is one. and DMSA is one. And I think I've talked about those before, but those are very harsh and very problematic. And a lot, Dr. Miriam listed both of them, for instance, but she acknowledges that a lot of people who do that have very strong side effects from it. Even though, honestly, when I've looked at the research of especially DMSA, it does seem to just be pretty effective. Anecdotally, I would never recommend it to anyone, because of how often it makes them feel horrible. And even alpha lipoic acid, I would say, is a strong detoxifier. It makes a lot of people feel bad. Also, just looking at heavy metal detox forums and stuff like that, a lot of people complain about it. EGCG in comparison just seems very mild in its side effect profile, compared to how effective it does actually seem to be. I don't think it's as effective as DMSA at the doses that most people usually take it, at least. I guess it depends on the dose. But I just think it's so much safer and so much lower side effect profile than DMSA, it seems. Now, caveat to that, admittedly, I've mainly done it as part of Jacob's formula, but I haven't totally. He does a lot of calibrating, like taking more of certain things after if you feel imbalanced. I don't quite do it the way he says, like he always wants you to do it within a few hours. I'll often just take, if I feel a little bit of something that I've learned to associate with this or that, then I'll just take EGCG the next day, without his formula, or a couple of days later or something like that. And I just find it to be very highly effective at reducing certain digestive symptoms, certain like sinus symptoms that I still sometimes suffered with, and maybe other stuff I haven't noticed. But yeah, I think Dr. Miriam said a few episodes ago it's become one of her favorite things to recommend for anti-aging. I would say, and obviously detoxification and anti-aging are linked. I'd say it's one of my favorite things now, for recommendations. For detoxification, certainly for me. And I personally like that I've got something that is, more effective than, because there's a lot of things out there that just don't work. I've tried them, like chlorella, unfortunately, or cilantro or zeolite, or all of these kind of things. I just don't think that they work. That's my lived experience on it, and that's also what I've seen, having seen people who've done these things for ages and then still have significant detoxification problems. It doesn't really seem to work to me. Whereas the EGCG, and it's reasonably provisional so far in terms of my own experience, but there's loads of studies on it, and there's loads of studies that say it works.
I was going to ask you, because it sounds amazing. Why do you think it is so good at detoxifying? What do you think that is it a mechanism of action? What is it?
I'm not sure. It just seems to have this binding affinity, that isn't so problematic. If I had to guess, a lot of the other types, they are like thiol based, so like alpha lipoic acid, DMSA, DMPS, even like food based stuff, garlic and onions. Uh, methionine. I'm trying to think of what stuff people often take for detox. Like a lot. Yeah, I'm struggling. But anyway, there's several other sulfur supplements I can't think of, all of which are used for detoxification and all of which can be effective. But I, I think there may be something where they're pulling stuff out of storage, and so they can just as easily make you feel much worse as they can make you feel better. I'm not sure about this, but my theory would be, which kind of aligns with Jacob's theory, that EGCG doesn't pull stuff out of storage, it just detoxifies what's already there. That's his theory, is that something else in his formula pulls the toxins out of storage, and then the EGCG kind of binds it out the blood and gets it out of your body safely, I think via the bile intestine avenue rather than through the urine. Although anecdotally, through my own test results, it looks to me like it's coming out of the urine as well when you use EGCG. So I think that might be it, but I don't know, and I'm not sure that anyone knows, when it comes to, there's so much of human biology that there's so much certainty around it, and then actually, they discovered it's completely different. It's not actually like that at all, and so I think this might be in that category. When it comes to like a living organism, like on a cellular basis, just the fact there's so much controversy about like, whether certain things are bad for you or not, it just indicates like there's a lot of stuff that we just don't know for sure. But if anyone does know for certain, leave it in the comments. I'd be interested to find out.
Yeah. Okay, great. So brilliant. EGCG. I'm gonna get it wrong. Get it right, Chris. ECGC. So yeah, you recommend that for detox. Now, I know Jacob has his formula, so we're talking about something potentially separate from his formula. So as far as let's get into recommended dosages and then potentially side effects that we want to watch out for.
Yeah, let's start with side effects. So EGCG, I think a lot of the reason people, were cautious about it is because it shows that at high levels it can create liver damage, and so that's fair, of course. So Jacob's take on that is that if you do it in his formula, then everything's balanced, and that doesn't happen. And at least it seems anecdotally, in the case of him and a few of his test subjects, they have done doses way higher than the research studies would indicate causes liver issues, and it would seem that it didn't cause it. Obviously, that is very anecdotal. So if you're not in that kind of experimental research team, I would recommend keeping at dosages that are considered safe. So that would be 200 milligrams, maybe 400 milligrams at the most, something like that. If you're having it on its own, probably even the lower end of that. So just gentle, maybe one capsule, let's say. I know like different capsules are different strengths. So if your capsule's 250 or 330 or something, yeah, just that. But like one capsule a day, you don't even have to take it every day. I think it just seems to be very effective at slowly pulling those toxins out without pulling new toxins out of storage. That's my theory on it as to why it just seems to be pretty low side effect thing that is nonetheless good at getting those toxins out.
Brilliant. Okay, if you guys haven't tried it, it's definitely one to look at, especially if detoxification is on your list. And in today's environment, with the air pollution, with everything else, it might be one to consider. Okay, so let's look at liver health. What is your number one supplement recommendation for liver health?
Great. And so again, this is a supplement, we're not including nutrients in here. So supplement recommendation would be Tudca. Torino Indico Sic, I don't know how to say it.
I was going to say, could you tell everybody what it is?
TUDCA. It is basically a bile salt with taurine, the amino acid, attached to it, which is how it's often found in the body. Anyway, why would this ever be a good idea? Because of this issue of cholestasis. So a lot of the time, bile stops flowing. This could be or stops flowing as well. It starts to become sludgy, and bile sludge is usually the term used in the medical community. They often call it like liver stones or gallstones in the kind of alternative health community, but technically they're not stones. It's kind of this kind of liquidish stuff that's become so thick it's more like a sludge, and so it can kind of get stuck. And so gallstones, I guess, are the most obvious example of. So when you get those stones build up in the gallbladder, that's where a lot of the time you're faced with a choice of, and often a medical doctor will encourage you to remove your gallbladder. But another thing, and they often don't present it as readily, and they should, in my opinion, is they can also present you with if it's the sludge rather than the hard calcium stones. They could also present you with the option of taking the Udca, the UDCA, which is like in the medication category, a bile salt, which helps to dissolve that overly sludgy bile, which can then mean that your gallbladder would be able to get better, would be able to heal itself from whatever inflammation or infection often has got hold of it because the bile has not been flowing for so long. There's also that point that's a bit more controversial, but which I think is true, which is that because the bile is the mechanism that the body uses to transport most of the most corrosive toxic toxins out of the body, that the bile itself is pretty toxic and pretty corrosive. And so, or at least it can be, especially if you're toxic. And so if the bile then stops flowing, the toxicity builds up, it kind of has more and more of a corrosive effect on everything it touches, like the liver and the gallbladder. And so that can potentially create problems as well. So keeping that bile flowing is really important for the reason I just said, which is more controversial, but the reasons I guess that everyone agree on is, number one, because the bile is essential for absorbing fats in the diet. So if the bile doesn't flow, you're not going to have that happen. Number two, because the bile is an essential part of disinfecting the contents of the digestive tract beyond where it is, so the intestines mainly. And so again, if the bile doesn't flow, you're much more likely to have SIBO, and you're much more likely to have all kinds of intestinal infections and stuff like that. And then, of course, number three, even if you don't necessarily agree that the bile is so corrosive, that's more a theory, but the truth is it is one of the main ways the body transports out the most toxic toxins. That's not really disputed. And so, of course, if that process gets stuck, it's not doing that job. And that's going to be a problem. And, the short term, it then puts more, if the bile is not flowing, then the liver eventually starts to become congested. This is often referred to as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. There's bile stones, there's cholecystitis, there's like infection of the liver or the gallbladder, there's inflammation of the liver and gallbladder, so all those kind of issues. But I would say actually more important, and in many cases and less focused on, is the downstream effects. Like if your liver is overloaded, then your body's, like, the liver is not a toxin storage area. The people who defend eating liver, that's what they say. It is a place where toxicity accumulates for the reasons I just said, but it's not really got a storage capacity. So when there's too much toxicity for your liver to deal with, it sends it back into the blood. And so then that puts a strain on the kidneys as the secondary kind of backup detoxification organ. And it also just puts a strain on everything that the blood touches, which is pretty much everything, but especially things like the brain and the nervous system and stuff like that. So it's very important to keep that bile moving. We got a whole episode on that, so I won't do any more on it. There's a bunch of things that can help with that, but again, if I can just give you one supplement, it would be Tudca. It is the supplement version of the medication that is used in the case of extreme cholecystitis, extreme bile stagnation. It's very effective. There's loads of studies that show that it's very effective for liver health, that it effectively reduces liver enzymes in people where they're high, which is not even that early sign of liver damage. So by the time your liver enzymes in your blood are high, it's because your liver is already being fairly damaged. So Tudca is very effective in that case. It's very effective in loads of cases. There's a few people I know who scaremonger about it. And again, like everything, it's not 100% safe. But overall, I see a lot more evidence for its effectiveness and its health promoting benefits as opposed to not. Now, having said that, there's nothing side effect free. If you really have no cholestasis and you really have no liver issue, I wouldn't recommend taking Tudca. It really is for people who need it and not people who don't.
Okay. And I mean, I know we've done other episodes on that, so we can refer other people to figure out or look at those to see if they might have that cholestasis. So I'll make sure that those descriptions are below. So as far as dosing, what would you recommend for somebody if they're looking at Tudca?
Anything from like 250 milligrams to maybe like a gram at the most, but usually half a gram, 500 milligrams is usually what the studies show.
Okay, brilliant. I know that liver health as well. It's one of those. I think we take it for granted because we never really, it'd be great if our organs, if we had a little machine that it would say, hey, an app for it, your liver saying, hey, be a little bit nicer to me. Give me some Tudca today. I need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess one of the most obvious signs of cholestasis, and there are a lot more and it's not definitive, but is constipation. So we could go into that one next.
Yeah, let's definitely go there. So what is your number one recommendation for constipation?
Okay, so assuming that, it's not cholestasis, so, look into that one first. Probably the nutrient one would be magnesium. But we're not doing nutrients, so I'll give you a non-nutrient one. This is something I actually discovered from Ray Pete, who we've done a couple of episodes on, and I think he wasn't generally a fan of supplements, even though a lot of his followers are. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But there was like a small handful that he was a fan of, and very small handful, and Cascara was one of them. Cascara sagrada. It's just a herb. It's a bitter herb, as all laxative types herbs are. So there's loads of different laxative herbs. There's, senna and rhubarb root and all kinds of stuff. And I guess every um, herbal or naturopathic or whatever practitioner has their favorites. And I've tried a lot because I've rarely ever had an issue of diarrhea. It's always been constipation, if anything, because I had that tendency for cholestasis. Um, and I have to say, a lot of laxatives, while they're effective, they tend to create kind of chaos in my digestive system. They tend to have kind of other unpleasant side effects. Often they create a lot of gas and discomfort and stuff like that. I've just found Cascara to be super, super effective without creating any negative side effects. And so I am a big fan of it for that reason. And these days, if someone has constipation, they don't want to take magnesium for whatever reason. Sometimes, it's not a good idea to overdo it with magnesium. That would be my number one herbal recommendation.
With Cascara, I mean, I have seen out there things too where that it can maybe overstimulate the body in the way of getting it out. So if you're
Oh,
saying,
totally.
yeah, okay,
Every laxative can,
yeah,
right? So that's a dose issue. I guess what I'm saying is that in order to it does to my experience, it doesn't create a load of chaos to get to an effective dose. Now, obviously, if you take more than an effective dose of a laxative, it can create a lot of chaos and it can create a lot of diarrhea and all the rest of it. So you definitely have to be careful with it and not overdo it. But it's just if you're constipated, obviously start with a small amount. Like with any and every laxative, like don't start with a very high dose because you may not like what the results. But I just think that's the one that I would start with of any herbal option.
okay.
And
And
I,
with oh,
and I
go
prefer
ahead.
herbal options, by the way, over drug options. I'm nothing against drugs. If they're more effective, they're more effective. I'm not prejudiced in that way. But in this case, my order of preference would be magnesium first, then Cascara. This Cascara also contains emodin, which we won't talk about now, but we'll talk about in a different thing. So there's like something within Cascara that has its own benefits as well that we'll get to. Um, and uh, and then drugs, and then actually then fibers, because a lot of the time if you go to a chemist or a pharmacist and say you got constipated, they'll give you some kind of fiber thing. And those fiber things, they work for some people, but they definitely don't work for everyone. They make a lot of people worse.
Yeah, they do. It definitely. Yeah. Yeah, that's something to watch out for. Let me ask you this then, with something like this, because it is a laxative, how long should somebody stay on it? Like, what should they give themselves? I'm assuming it wouldn't be indefinitely. They'd want to, hopefully fix the constipation and be able to come off of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hopefully the cholestasis would be, something that is effective. But yeah, it's case by case. For some people, the bowels become very sluggish. Sometimes it's like short chain fatty acid deficiency, like butyrate, in which case that would be something to consider. But butyrate, if you have inflammation in your gut, it can create more gas and more discomfort and stuff like that. Taurine is Tudca, as we just talked about, is very effective, but if someone doesn't need it, it's still probably not a good idea to take a bile salt that you don't need and all that kind of stuff. So Cascara is kind of maybe after magnesium pretty much the safest kind of starting place. But yeah, the ultimately what you want to do probably if if it's not a temporary thing, because often it's just caused by stress, often it's just caused by inactivity, often it's just caused by some kind of bad diet choices. But if it's more long term, then you need to look at what the actual roots of the constipation are. Maybe with medical stuff like a colonoscopy and that kind of thing, but maybe with kind of functional medicine stuff like doing a full stool test that checks kind of everything that's going on in there. Because often it's some kind of dysbiosis, it's some kind of bacteria imbalance. If it's not, as I said, the more obvious stuff like inactivity and diet and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was recently chatting with a doctor talking about UTIs and or just that bacterial overgrowth, and said constipation is one of the causes of it because it creates this sort of warm pocket area that rests against the bladder that then can create the environment where things are proliferating therefore. And so it's really very important to get the bowel moving regularly so that environment doesn't persist or it's just not there.
Yep, 100%.
Which, yeah, so perfect. So let's go into bladder then. What is your number one supplement recommendation for the bladder?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of D-mannose. Um, D-mannose is one of the things found in cranberry. So if you want to do a natural one, it is cranberry. I won't, spend a lot of time on this one because I think everyone who's had bladder issues probably already knows this one, but I just want to give a shout out to that is my go-to one. And so there's a couple of things that cause bladder issues. One of them is like a tension thing. And if that's the case, no supplement is probably going to be really effective other than maybe an anti-stress, anti-anxiety one. So I'd kind of skip to that category. Another one is going to be like an inflammatory issue, and that could be for a few different reasons. Let's say non-infectious inflammation for a second. Then that would be like a detox thing that might help. So even back to EGCG, and that might be effective. I know we have anti-inflammatory somewhere on our list there. That kind of thing would be effective. So really with the bladder, if it's not all of that kind of stuff, then often it's some kind of infection. And so for infections, sometimes you need antibiotics, but a lot of the time D-mannose is actually very effective. So the most common type of bacterial infection in the bladder is E. coli. The E. coli, as you said, is in the large intestine. Sometimes it gets through to the bladder, and when it does, it's can cause a lot of issues. If it gets from the bladder to the kidneys, it can cause serious life-threatening issues. So it's definitely not something that you want to avoid. But the reason, so cranberry is kind of the what's the word? The home remedy version of treating that. And the part that's the most effective out of that is that cranberry is high in a sugar called D-mannose. And so D-mannose is a type of sugar that E. coli is a big fan of. So you might think, well, if you've got an infection or something, why would you feed the thing that it's a fan of? Well, it turns out that when you take it, a decent amount of D-mannose goes to the bladder, and then the E. coli kind of attaches to the D-mannose. It kind of detaches from the bladder, attaches to the D-mannose, and then it just gets flushed through because what the bladder does is flushing. So that's the theory, as I understand it, behind it. And it is very effective if the issue is an infection. I say it that way because a lot of people, when they have cystitis and stuff like that, that's really more, maybe they're having chronic infections, and it's more of an immune system issue. In that case, it's kind of only temporarily effective. But a lot of the time, as I said, I think that's more other stuff. I think that's more, sometimes it's an allergy, sometimes it's an issue of chronic tension of like the muscles around the bladder that's causing an issue. So I'm not saying that D-mannose always works if you have bladder pain, but if you know you actually have a bladder infection, you can test with the urine test strips, for instance, and if you have elevated leukocytes and stuff like that, it's a very cheap, simple at-home test. And if you go to a doctor, even emergency room, I discovered when I went with someone once who had the issue, like that's all they do. They just do the 10 cents urine test. And so you can just do that at home as well, as long as you have a test that you trust and that's reliable. And if you have those signs of a bladder infection, go to a doctor. But let's say you can't get a doctor appointment for 2 days and they don't treat it as if it's very serious, which they normally don't, to be honest, then reach for some D-mannose. You may well find that it really helps. A lot of people, it works. But again, only works if it's an infection, which honestly often isn't.
Right. Well, that makes absolute sense because, if it's the infection, it's the E. coli, then that's really where that D-mannose is going to help.
Oh, and sorry, I just want to add actually. So when I've talked to Dr. Miriam about this, her opinion of this is slightly different. She actually thinks D-mannose is a good idea, even if you don't have an infection.
That's what I was just going to ask.
Okay.
Perfect. Go.
Just because her view of it is, there's always some degree of like bacteria and stuff in any area that's technically outside the body, and bladder's kind of borderline in that regard. Kidneys is definitely inside the body, but bladder's kind of borderline, the urethra. So even if something else is causing it, having the bacteria there still irritates the bladder. So her view of it still like helps, and potentially it's soothing as well for the lining of the bladder. I believe that's what she said. So yeah, it's worth a try anyway, but I'm just saying it's less likely to be effective if it's not an infection.
And are there any things that we need to look out, somebody needs to look out for if they are taking D-mannose that they should, be aware of?
It's very safe for the dosages that are normally used and recommended. I've not come across anything that, I mean, it's a type of sugar. Like with anything, maybe if you take too much of it, it can cause some imbalance in the gut bacteria and stuff like that. But actually, the Mannose is also used secondarily for the gut bacteria. It does also help. What is it for the leaky gut? I think that's one of the reasons that people use it. I know it's in. Pretty sure it's in Dr. Gundry's one of his formulas for leptin intolerance or something like that. I think for improving, leaky gut. I don't remember. I didn't look into this before the episode. It's been a few years. But basically, yeah, it potentially has some gut health benefits as well. I have not seen ever anyone having significant side effects from it, at least used at the moderate amounts. So it's normally like 5 milligram, 1,000 milligrams, something like that.
Okay, and then as far as dosaging, I'm assuming that just on the back of the packet, that's what you would follow or recommend, or would there be something else?
If you've got an infection and you have, I would say you could temporarily at least double what it says in the packet. But again, I would only do that if it's working, and if it isn't working, I would, either stop or take it back down again.
Okay. All right. Great. Good one. So going next onto our list, let's take a look at, because we did just recently talk about gut health. So let's take a look at that. What is your number one supplement recommendation for gut health?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because there's so many different things. And of course, it depends a lot on what the problem you have with your gut is in the first place. But I would say my kind of favorite, like safe, has loads of benefits, supplement, not nutrient, is lactoferrin.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. Wow, lactoferrin. I wouldn't have said that. So tell me, why do you put gut health together with lactoferrin?
So, gut. By gut, when I hear gut, I kind of hate the word gut actually, but everyone uses it. Like, I think more intestines. I think there's a different one on the list for like more the stomach and the duodenum. But yeah, when we're talking about the intestines, I'm a huge fan of lactoferrin. So, lactoferrin is something that's naturally found in milk. It's not found in milk once it's been pasteurized and stuff, like most of the milk we have is, but unpasteurized, unheat treated milk, breast milk, but cow's milk, goat's milk, whatever, it's going to have that lactoferrin in. So this is something that is given from a mother to a baby when they're very young. So why am I saying that? Because it has huge amounts of benefit in helping to build that healthy immune system, digestive system, and microbiome from that very early age. Now, exactly how it works is interesting. There's a theory about health that says that like excess iron is actually very problematic for health. Someone who I get asked about every now and then in the comment section, is it called the root cause protocol or something? Basically seems to revolve all around like excess iron is the root cause of all health problems, and there's lots of people who believe it. Jacob, who we've mentioned a few times in this episode, he's been on the show. He thinks that excess iron and copper, and then lack of zinc is the root cause of all health issues. Excess iron, certainly in the extreme level, is definitely a problem, and that's acknowledged by everyone, including the medical community. They call it hemochromatosis, I think, something like that. And so, but it is understood that although you need a certain amount of iron, that when you have too much iron, that it is a pro-oxidant. So it damages anything that it touches beyond a certain level, it kind of rusts the inside of the body. And so you can definitely have too much iron. So there's also the understanding that pretty much every microorganism that exists inside the gut actually eats iron, including a lot of the bad ones. And so one of the theories as to how it helps the digestive tract so significantly, it makes a lot of sense if you believe this iron is a really bad thing theory, because the lactoferrin binds to the iron in the gut, with the food that you eat, and stops it from being eaten by those microbes, which then stops them from overgrowing. That's basically the idea. Because I believe almost every organism eats iron, but it seems to be more, there's a preference for it by the bad organisms, just to be simplistic. So bifidobacteria, for instance, so like a baby, like as much, I think, as 80% of their bacteria is all bifidobacteria. Once you're an adult, it's often less than 1%, but as a baby, it's super high. So that bifidobacteria, it doesn't feed on iron in any significant quantity. Like, it likes other stuff more, at least. So by having more iron available, you're going to have more of the stuff you don't want, like not bifidobacteria growing in the intestines. So that's definitely one mechanism. So yeah, E. coli, which I think we mentioned earlier in the context of the bladder, that's one of those examples of bacteria that classically does feed on it. The bacteria, I believe, that create endotoxin are more likely to feed on iron. And endotoxin, as we've talked about before, endotoxin damages the gut, but if it gets from the gut into the bloodstream, as it often does, especially if there's more permeability of the gut, it kind of damages everything. It's one of the biggest toxin loads that our body has to deal with, and it causes premature aging, it causes all kinds of problems. So again, less food for those bacteria that create more toxins is a good thing. So that's like the primary mechanism that I'm aware of, but it has a bunch of other stuff. So it reduces a lot of the inflammatory components of the immune system. It promotes more of the regulating aspects of the immune system rather than the inflammatory aspects of the immune system. So I definitely recommend it to people with low iron, but I also recommend it to people who have just digestive issues in general. I also, anecdotally, although I actually haven't seen research for this, but it seems to help with cholestasis as well. And my fear about that might just be because it reduces the inflammation, that there's kind of a cascading effect that means ultimately the bile flows better. But I don't really understand fully why that mechanism is the case, to be honest. But it does seem to be the case as well.
Right. It sounds like everybody should be on lactoferrin, to be fair.
I mean, pretty much. So who should not be? So
Yeah, great.
it seems like people. It seems like it does seem to speed up some kind of detoxification processes, and so for some people it makes them feel worse. And the reason why the theory is that that's why is because it is people who have a lot of toxicity who tend to be the ones who feel worse on lactoferrin. I've seen that even like I've got some clients who are like extremely reactive to things, like very sensitive, like allergies and stuff like that. But they're usually even fine on lactoferrin. So I don't think that's what it is. In fact, they feel better on lactoferrin. So I don't think that's what it is. People with very high toxic load, they can feel worse on it. So I think that's probably the reason why it can make some people feel worse. So often Dr. Smith, who we had on a couple of times, he recommends lactoferrin. He's a big fan of it, but he recommends people to start extremely low. Like, I think he says 1/30th of a capsule or something like that. Like, and even some people react to that. So that's definitely one reason why you wouldn't want to do it. I would say, actually, if you're in a moderate to high level of health, it probably is a good idea to take it some of the time. The thing is, it's not super cheap. That is unfortunately the case. So kind of like everyone with an unlimited budget should probably do at least a course of lactoferrin every now and then. Why not just every day for the rest of their lives? I don't think it would do any harm, but it's it's one more capsule to take, one more capsule for your body to deal with. This kind of diminishing returns thing. But I kind of agree with you. And if you are someone who has issues of excess iron, it's kind of it's counterintuitive. So because it stops the bacteria eating the iron, often it actually raises the level of ferritin in people who are depleted in iron. So one of the categories of people I definitely recommend lactoferrin to is people who are low in iron, low in ferritin in their test results, and maybe symptoms of anemia. But it counterintuitively also seems to help with the symptoms of excess iron. And so I'm not quite sure why that is, but a theory that I developed, I don't know if anyone else has thought of it before, but they probably have, is that just as it binds it in the gut and stops the bacteria from eating it, and therefore allows your body to absorb it, I would say possibly it keeps it bound even once you have absorbed it, once it's in the bloodstream, and therefore it stops it causing oxidative stress. So that's my theory on it, but again, unproven. So it seems to help people both who have lack of iron and excess iron, weirdly.
That's, yeah, that's great. Because I was going to, so really what I'm hearing too is anyone that is potentially not very well, or they know they have a lot of cholestasis, or know that they have an issue with detoxification, they should proceed with caution with lactoferrin. Somebody that's in pretty good health, then okay, you should be able to move forward with this.
Yeah, and I mean, like for instance, if you have a lot of allergies and stuff, you may not feel like you're in pretty good health, but I still, in my experience, it's just fine. So it's and if you have metabolic syndrome, if you're insulin resistance, it should be just fine. It's really people who have like food sensitivities and kind of those kind of obvious like toxin symptoms, I guess, who should be careful.
Brilliant. Okay. Lactoferrin sounds like a little gem. And to be fair, the next one on my list was low iron. So I think we've kind of done a 2-for-1 on that. So let's move straight forward to, let's go to inflammation. What is your number one recommendation for inflammation?
Yeah, good one. Well, the best thing for inflammation is really to find the root cause, right? It's not any supplement. But again, if I had to give a supplement and not a nutrient, and sometimes I do, I would actually recommend CBD.
Okay. Why? Why would you go to CBD?
So I'll quickly tell you my history of CBD. So I used to use loads of cannabis. I even used to grow it myself in my early 20s. And I completely overdosed on it. I used it all day, every day. I was one of those people genetically susceptible to. I think it made me go into psychosis at least slightly. I was never diagnosed or whatever, so I don't want to make a big deal out of it. But I was not quite right, and it took a long time to get off it. And I actually, for me, it was more addictive than other things like cigarettes and nicotine. I used to smoke all day as well. I found that a lot easier to quit than cannabis, for instance. A lot of people say it's hard to quit. So, and then I kind of hated cannabis. And if I even smelled it on someone's breath, I was like, oh God, it's just, and the way people are on it, I honestly can't stand being around people on it. And to be honest, I still feel that way. But so that's my kind of up and down history with it. And so I was very resistant to the idea of when CBD started becoming popular. It's after all that. It's the last 10 years. I quit 20 years ago, almost. I was very resistant to the idea. And, but a couple of things changed my mind. First of all, I was listening to a lot. I listened to, I don't know, 50, 100 hours of lectures by someone called Christopher Shade, who I consider to be a very interesting detoxification specialist. He especially specialized in mercury detoxification. So, I just kind of absorbed all his work that I could, mainly in the form of live streams. And I was very surprised. And, he was one of those people as well who deals with a lot of people. When you deal with a lot of people with mercury toxicity, you're dealing with a lot of people who are like extremely struggling with their health and also extremely reactive to a lot of stuff. And he said that when you have that kind of client who they can't handle anything, most food, they're reactive to most types of foods, but even most supplements make them feel worse. Most herbs make them feel worse. Like the average naturopath, nutritionist, functional medicine doctor is kind of at a loss because it's like everything that they know what to do, like the client is reacting to, and so they don't know what to do. And also even the things that you would use to try and detoxify them. Let's say you found they've got mercury, but then EDTA makes them feel worse and DMSA makes them feel worse. It's just like, oh my God, what do I do with this person? That in that situation, which is not that uncommon, that he found that CBD was the most effective thing. And I was, open but skeptical. It's not like I don't hero worship people. It's not like, if I agree with a bunch of stuff they say, I agree with everything. But I was like, okay, it's interesting that that's their perspective. And then when I first did my genetic reports, I remember it said something about how I had a tendency for like low levels of endocannabinoids, and endocannabinoids are like the um, I don't know what the word is, the compounds that it's not a neurochemical, but the compounds that your body naturally makes um, that have a certain effect. God, I'm being very vague here because it actually has a very broad effect, which guess I'll get into in a minute. That they discovered because they were just looking at how cannabis works. Like most of the neurotransmitters actually were originally discovered by looking at how does a certain drug work. So I believe dopamine was first discovered because they looked at like how does cocaine work. Um, the endorphins were first discovered because they were looking at like how does morphine work. So things like that. So they discovered this whole class of neurochemicals, maybe that's the word, by looking at how cannabis works. Anyway, some people have high levels of those endocannabinoids. They're going to be a lot less tempted by cannabis because they already have enough of those. Some people have low levels of endocannabinoids. They're going to be a lot more tempted by cannabis because they're going to feel like, oh, this is giving me something that I was lacking in. So I was in that category of having low levels. And it was very interesting. In terms of the genetics, it was like the first recommendation was don't have cannabis. Because I had that tendency for, again, psychosis and even schizophrenia with THC. And I was like, agreed, awesome, we're on the same page, good. But then the second recommendation was try some CBD. And I was like, I definitely agree with number one. I can't just immediately openly dismiss number two, right? That would be very inconsistent. So then I started looking into it. And, cannabis is famously, CBD is famously quite, effective and used for like anxiety. Um, and I honestly, and I didn't really like it for that because I feel like it's a kind of numbing agent. And so I kind of felt like people's idea that it helps with pain was not really because it helps with inflammation, but just because it kind of numbed them out. And so I didn't, I don't disrespect anyone who is really suffering and struggling to take anything to make them feel better. That's completely valid, and I understand why anyone would do that. But I just didn't think it was optimal. But when I really looked into it, when I looked into the difference in CBD and THC, and when I really looked into understanding the endocannabinoid system specifically, I saw, there's these CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors. And I learned that, the immune system is actually quite affected by some of these systems that we associate more with like how we feel. And the two that surprised me were the endorphin system. And we've talked about that before, and when we've talked about low dose naltrexone, so how the endorphins actually have a very impact on the immune system and therefore inflammation and how we feel. But actually, the whole cannabinoid system also has a very impact on the immune system. And so that THC as well, but THC has also other potential issues like the ones I just mentioned. But CBD had a very like beneficial effect by stimulating the CB2 receptors and creating genuine lack of inflammation in the body. So then I was like, okay, I'm starting to become convinced. So then I looked into it and started to look at the studies and stuff like that. And it's like, you know what? It seems to be actually very effective for a lot of different inflammatory conditions. And then I remembered back to, listening to Dr. Shea talk about it a while ago. I was like, okay, this does make sense. So I actually tried it, and this was back in 2021, or I think 2021, when I was like in the full grips of extremely high heavy metal toxicity and really not feeling great and having this kind of issue where I was reacting to almost everything, which is typical when your immune system's completely dysregulated because of, for various different reasons, but in my case, it was because of heavy metal poisoning. And it was actually very effective. I found it was very effective at calming me down. And it was very effective at also stopping me having these reactions to all these different things. And so, since then, it's not my number one thing to recommend to people because of its dating and it kind of numbing effects still. And so when here's the way I look at it. Like a lot of people are kind of running too slowly already. Like they're kind of slow in the uptake. They're not really present. They're kind of in a dream world. And giving those people CBD is not, it's like bringing them in the wrong direction to me. But there's a significant amount of people, probably a minority, but a significant amount of people who are like really adrenalized. They move quickly, their brain works quickly, they can't sit down, they can't calm down, they can't relax, and they are reactive, emotionally reactive, they are defensive, and yes, they are also immune system reactive, they react to everything. And that kind of person, I just find that CBD, and I'm one of those kind of people, and that kind of person, I just find that the CBD is just really, really very effective for. And so for I put it as my number one thing for inflammation because if you're like people who are the opposite type, they tend to have inflammation for different reasons. A lot of the time, it's just because they've eaten the wrong food for too long, they haven't moved enough, that kind of stuff, which has its own causes, often hormonal, which we talked about before. But in this case, like s- compared to the other things that are often used as anti-inflammatories, like curcumin and all that kind of stuff, I just think that CBD is so much more effective as as an intervention to just calm that whole inflammatory thing down. It's not as effective for allergies. Doesn't really work for that kind of inflammation. That's both my experience plus what the studies show. But for the stress-based kind of inflammatory response, but as I said, it's not only working on stress. It genuinely modulates the immune system. But it seems to me that especially for that type, it's really effective. It's still cannabis, so it still has this effect. Like it numbs you out to some degree, it slows you down to some degree, it increases your appetite to some degree. So for someone who already is too numbed out, too slow, and too hungry, it's not my number one recommendation. Um, and in that case, maybe something like aspirin or I guess white willow bark, if you want a supplement version, might actually be a better like anti-inflammatory for those people. Um, you shouldn't use aspirin too much, but honestly, I think you shouldn't use CBD too much. But again, these are supposed to be my favorites, not just what I generally think is a good idea. So for my favorite, for me and people like me, CBD.
Right, yeah, because I do, there's that little bit of hesitation because I do see CBD widely on the market now. It's in different, just in, sparkling water or this or that. It's kind of a little bit of everywhere. So I'm a little apprehensive with it in that regard. But, are there, I know that you said you wouldn't recommend it for somebody that's already potentially more on the, in that slower pace mode. But are there any other things to look out for if somebody is taking it, like that's, the side effects that they wouldn't want to have?
Yeah, I mean, less present. It's not psychoactive. That's the other key thing I didn't really fully understand until I dug into it. Although I think most people know that these days. And in fact, it's anti-psychoactive. So meaning if you take THC or as far as I understand, even a different psychoactive like I don't know mushrooms, psilocybin, the more CBD you have, it actually is an anti-psychoactive effect. So that's to me good. It's more like grounding you in reality in that sense. But it is it is sedative to most people. If it has any effect, it's certainly at a high enough dose, it's a sedative. If it is anything other than isolate, if it is broad spectrum or full spectrum, then it's going to come with a bunch of other cannabinoids and a bunch of other terpenes that also all have their own effects, all of which could be a problem. So there's the non-CBD effects with all the stuff that's usually added to that you have to add in. But if I remove that for a second, because I'm just talking about CBD, then there's the thing about operating heavy machinery, driving, trying to work. Um, you wouldn't want someone flying your plane or even driving your taxi to be on CBD. So it's really a thing more that it's if you don't need full sharp mental function. It also has a drying effect on the body, and that's actually one of the main reasons why I don't use it. I tend to have, if anything, dry sinuses. Really, I don't have dry skin or anything else. But I noticed that. Drying for the mucous membrane. So some people dry. That's a famous thing, I think, like for cannabis users, you get dry mouth. That's just what they call it, or cotton mouth. So all cannabis has that kind of drying effect to some degree, including CBD. So that's something. But honestly, in terms of actual safety, rather than just things that are, annoyances or potentially dangerous in contexts, like the driving thing or whatever, the studies seem to show it is very safe, even at high doses. So people are often, taking 20, 30 milligram gummies, capsules, drops or whatever. But I've seen studies where people are using 500 milligrams a day, 1,000 milligrams a day for months and months on end. MS, remember, is a study I saw. And there's like pretty much no, medically significant side effects. So it does seem to be very safe if it's pure CBD. Now, as I said, cannabis is one of the most dirty in terms of just the way that the plant seems to pull toxic stuff out of the ground. So it's often high in heavy metals. It's often dried and treated in a way where it then grows mold. So it might have mold and mycotoxins. If it's not organic, then it may be soaked in pesticides. So there's a load of other stuff in it that's bad, that may be bad for you. But just actual, genuinely pure CBD that, all of that has been extracted out. I think it seems, my experience and my understanding is it's very safe, except for within the context we talked about.
Well, Owen, this has been quite a comprehensive list. So thank you for sharing your number one supplement recommendations for all of the, I don't know, I guess what you would say, ailments, things, or just, overall
Issues.
health issues that people, yeah, thank you, want to look at. So thank you for those recommendations, because I know sometimes it can be a bit of a minefield out there of people looking and just not knowing where to start or where to begin. Before we close, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I don't consider that a final list. That's my list. And I would love it if you go to the comment section and tell me your list, or just anything, right? If there's anything, especially out of stuff we've covered, but also if it's stuff that we, I know that we have another list that's probably we could do a whole another episode for different issues, different things that are my favorites. We'll get to at some point. Let us know if you would like to see that. But also, let me know what your favorite thing is. Let me know what you think is most effective. Maybe if I haven't tried it already, I'll try it. Maybe if I've tried it and it was a while ago, I'll try it again. Let's crowdsource this ultimate list together. This is really just meant to be a starting point. And other than that, please do share this with your friends. I know a bunch of you do. I see it in the stats that people share it, and I really appreciate you sharing. Please continue to do so. Share it on social media, share it in forums, share it in, if you're a blogger, share it in your blog, share it anywhere that you can. And like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, if you're on YouTube, if you're commenting on YouTube, I read every comment and I reply to every comment that's a question, and most of them, even if they're not questions. So I'll see you in the comment section, and thank you for watching or listening.
Absolutely. Great, Owen. Thanks everyone for joining here, and do what he says. We'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode. And one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there. Or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.